Happy Monday, February 26th, here on the Just Baseball Show. For all you beautiful listeners, we have a loaded show. I asked Aram pre-record, and I said, do you want to also add top 10 center fielders to this? And I don't know exactly how you responded, but I got the gist. You're like, you're crazy because we have to talk about Cody Bellinger going back to the Chicago Cubs. We have plenty of notes from the first few weeks of college baseball and then some way too early takeaways for spring training. But the cherry on top of the episode, Walker Buehler is back from the Los Angeles Dodgers to speak with us about the last 40 minutes of the show. And it's all brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. People, put $5 down. You get $150 loaded into your account. Yep. All you got to do is use code JustBaseball, right? When you download BetMGM on iOS or Android, you put in the code JustBaseball, you deposit, you put $5 on standard odds, and you get $150 loaded into your account. It's an absolute no-brainer. I wouldn't be telling you this unless I did it myself. Aram, you did it yourself too, because why wouldn't you? It's free money to use for the rest of the season. We got to talk about all the early takeaways to get ready for the season. How are you? You good?
If I'm great. If we did another top 10 in this episode, it would have been 3 hours long.
We'd be here for 3
It
hours.
would have been Oppenheimer, basically, same duration. I'm down for it, but I was like, dude, you and I already go long, and then if we put that in there, this is a feature film that we're going to be recording here. Like, it's going to be real long, and I know that we're going to end up talking about so many things with Walker, which I'm really excited about too, because there's a lot going on. It's literally a circus, and in the best way possible in the Dodgers spring training right now. That first game was insane. I can't wait to ask him about that. So, yeah, we got a lot of things going on. Of course, Bellinger signs in like the middle of the night, but yeah.
It's ridiculous, right? We get the alert at 2:30 in the morning and I wake up, right? And Jack is in, right? Jack's probably going to be on the podcast later in the week. Where is he right now? Is he in Sweden or
I
something?
think he's in Sweden. I
He
think
was
it's Sweden.
he was our Norwegian correspondent. That's what
Yeah.
Colby said in the group chat. I thought that was hilarious, right? Because he's the one posting about all these things at 2 in the morning because I think it's like 8 a.m. for him. I have no idea the time zones. But this episode is not about Jack McMullen's time zones. We have
No.
too much to talk about. I was going to ask you if you even liked Oppenheimer, that reference, but
Didn't
I don't
see it.
really care. I don't think anybody else cares. I
You know
think we
why I
should.
didn't see it? It's too long.
It's too long. So let's get straight into it. So we have college baseball, we have spring training notes, and we have Cody Bellinger. But Cody Bellinger is the big story, so I want to start with him first. He just signed a 3-year, $80 million deal with the Chicago Cubs. It's not quite $80 million. Bellinger is going to get $30 million this year, and then $30 million again in 2025 and $20 million in 2026. All of those are options, right? He signed a 1-year, $17.5 million deal last season. Scott Boras saga was looking for a big time deal, but it looks as if right now he's signing that 1-year deal. If he explodes again, probably going to opt out. And we have the same saga right over again. It's Monday, February 26th. We're probably going to have the exact same conversation about Cody Bellinger next year after he goes off again.
Yeah. I think so. Obviously, the market didn't materialize the way that, and no one really thought it would, right? When we saw those reports of $200+ million, everybody had the same reaction. And if everybody has the same reaction, it's probably not going to happen because teams probably had the same reaction. Of course, it was nice to see Bellinger bounce back last year, but we've talked about some of the underlying batted ball data, maybe not pointing towards the numbers being as sustainable. And then, of course, you have so many years prior, multiple years prior of him really struggling. I think he can be really good, but am I confident enough to give him $200+ million? No, and I don't think any other team was either. So those, brutal Boris puns, obviously, loosening up their belts or whatever for the belly, whatever. Like, I guess they technically loosened it up like a notch or two, but not that much. It's a great deal for the Cubs because like you have the safety here of really worst case scenario, it's an $80 million deal where he's opting into the last 2 years. And you'd imagine just with the defense alone, it's that deal can't totally kill you, but you're probably assuming that he plays pretty well. And, in the market that we've seen, the way that guys are continuing to make more and more, and with the deal kind of being front loaded, right? The third year is 20 million, that he probably does opt out at least in one of these 2 years here and hit the open market still before his 30th birthday, most likely. So it's great for both sides. And I think this was the most likely scenario. I think pretending that this wasn't kind of the market value for him at this point was a little silly. Of course, Boris does this thing where he's able to get outs for Bellinger if he performs, which is great for him. And for the Cubs, they bring him back. They're happy about that. And for Bellinger, a little bit of safety as well in case he does fall flat, that he has a 3-year, $80 million deal as well. So I think it was a great deal for all parties. And, I just think we got away from what reality was. Like, this should have always been what was discussed as a deal. But it's always weird when you hear a number floated and then it's a quarter of that. But at the same time, this is, I think, what the market value was.
Also, I think there's a lot of Boris clients out there. I think Cody Bellinger and Blake Snell are at the top of that list, right? Who wanted a ton of money. Blake Snell coming off a Cy Young, Cody Bellinger coming off close to an MVP type season, wanting 200 plus million, but probably getting below that.
I don't know about MVP type season.
He had a damn good season last year.
MVP type is kind of
maybe it's a little overblown.
He had a 4-win season. It was a good year.
It was a good year. I over exaggerated there. The reason I brought that up is I wanted to contextualize some of the batted ball data for Cody Bellinger that probably, Cubs fans don't want to admit, right? But the market was looking at, right? A very easy one, and we can go more in depth on this if you want, but I like to look at WOBA versus xWOBA. Yeah. It's very simple, right? It's your quality of contact and what did you deserve? Like, did you deserve those results? It's not perfect, but it's two easy numbers to look at, right? We're looking at a 370 WOBA to a 327 xWOBA. That is a bad sign, right? Sometimes when we project, we think this guy is going to be better. He might have a 327 WOBA and a 370 xWOBA. Like, just to put that in perspective, Connor Joe, Michael Conforto, all had higher xWOBAs than Cody Bellinger did last year. Yeah. Do you think that 80 million is right for a guy like this, where he put up that MVP season right back, I think it was 2019, disappeared basically, then put up a 4-win season, was a very valuable player for the Cubs last year? Like, do you think this is probably right?
I think this is pretty much the market value after bouncing back, because you see the defensive value that you're going to get there in center field. And then, of course, if you want to stick him at first base, obviously, if I'm paying a guy this much, I want him playing defense in center field. But even with some of the batted ball luck that you can point towards, and, if you look at even some of his best years, the WOBA and xWOBA were closer. So meaning, the batted ball quality was, more on par with the numbers that you saw last year, not as much. Sometimes there's guys that just always overperform those metrics, and you need more than a 1-year sample to say, oh, that's one of those guys. So again, why I think teams were hesitant to give him 5+ years, especially after struggling after the last couple. But given that, in the worst case scenario, it's an $80 million deal that, goes cheaper, right? The last 2 years are going to be 2 years, 50 million. I think it's a fine deal. And again, if he balls out, it's really only a 1-year deal anyways. So I think it's a great deal for the Cubs. I think when you look at it from Bellinger, still has the safety and the upside. And with Pete Crow Armstrong kind of waiting in the wings, I feel like they're in a win-win situation. If Bellinger's playing really, really well, then, he's probably going to opt out, and you got PCA plugging in there. If he does not play that great, you probably have an opportunity here to move him to another position, figure out how things are going to go. But I still think they have the contingency plan. It's not going to break the bank at 2 years, 50 million over the next, over the final 2 years. So I think they're in a pretty comfortable spot. And we were waiting for them to make at least one more splash here. And I think this was the right splash to make instead of trying to force something like Matt Chapman. Like, I'd rather have Bellinger than Chapman for sure, assuming that it's in a similar price range too.
I couldn't agree with you more, right? You talk about Pete Crow Armstrong, but at the same time, it keeps the Cubs flexible within payroll, right? They're projected right now to be $32 million under the luxury tax. I think Jed Hoyer and company kind of realize, hey, maybe this isn't the year that we go all in, but we still have a good team, and then we have all these prospects when they're coming up, so they can stay flexible like that. I think the reason, Arm, that I said he sort of had an MVP type season is, from a counting numbers perspective, the dude hit 307 with a 525 slug, put up an 880 OPS, a 134 WRC plus, 26 bombs, 20 stolen bases. That's not quite MVP, but I was looking at that thinking to myself, I mean, that was a damn good year. But you add in the quality of contact concerns, and I think there's a difference in opinion of the market. But overall, for the Cubs, I think it has to be labeled as a win. Like, let's say he struggles this season. All right, you're not locked into some 7, 8 year contract. You got 3 years left on the deal. And if he does opt in, it's not crazy expensive for a guy who does have the potential, right, to hit 300, hit 25 bombs, steal 20 bags, play outfield, play first base, can do a lot of different things for you. And you mentioned the defensive acumen. Even when he's not a great hitter, he can still provide value on the defensive side.
I mean, we saw him have a positive WAR while being one of the worst qualified hitters in Major League Baseball, and you don't think he's ever going to get there again, even if he does take a step backwards or a lateral step. That's why I think it's a solid and safe deal, and I'm glad to see the Cubs continue to be aggressive because I mean this team can make some noise, especially in that division.
It's also good to see Cubs fans kind of relax a little bit because
Yeah,
I saw them just going after Ricketts, after their owner being like, you make $1
yeah,
trillion from Wrigleyville. Why are we not investing in the team? But I think overall they have a good pulse. Not the fans. I'm talking about Jed Hoyer and Ricketts, a good pulse on kind of where they are at. Like if I was them, I wouldn't have spent crazy either. I think the door is opening though, and I think the Cubs will have sustained success for the next half decade, depending on how these prospects work out. Now there's also a negative, right? What if some of the prospects don't blossom and Cody Bellinger looks a lot like those middling years between his MVP year and then last year? There's also a downside to this, but I think more signs point to positive than negative. I'm just the asshole pointing out there's a possible negative.
you know, I, yeah, I don't. I think that's a negative no matter what, right? Like, what if they didn't sign Bellinger and the prospects didn't work out? Then it's even
Mm-hmm.
worse. So, I think this is a better position for them to be in. I think it gives Pete Crow Armstrong a little bit more time to continue to develop, and I know he's made some swing adjustments that I'm very interested in and excited about, and now he can actually see those, translate maybe in AAA. Not as much pressure to instantly contribute. And again, if Bellinger opts out after this year, then PCA will be ready and waiting in the wings.
They got a good setup. And your boy, Brennan Davis.
Starting to hit the ball again. Hopefully he's healthy. It's all about the back for him. So the back's all right. If he's healthy, we've seen him put up some crazy numbers. He was one of the best hitters in the minor leagues for a few years, but it's been nice to see him healthy and swinging it in spring.
That's good. Let's talk about college baseball, right? Before we'll do MLB, the big signing of MLB. We'll do college baseball. Then we'll get back to spring training notes. And then, of course, Walker Buehler. So, Hagen Smith, he's the headliner. 17 strikeouts through 5 innings. He had 15 strikeouts. You're hearing me correctly, folks. There's only 15 outs you can get in 5 innings. And he had 15 strikeouts. And I just thought, I mean, Hagen Smith, of course, is incredibly talented. But his first start was objectively terrible. And then the
Yeah.
way he bounced back, and it wasn't 15 strikeouts against Manhattan College. It wasn't 15 strikeouts against Middle Tennessee. It was 15 strikeouts, or 17, excuse me, against Oregon State, one of the best teams in the country. When Pete was on, right, they're one of my World Series picks. They're a phenomenal team. 17 strikeouts. He had a little bit of Rodon in him. 97 with just the slider from hell.
Yeah.
From a prospect perspective, after watching that, right? Because you, as a draft expert and prospect expert, you're not just going to look at one start like I do and just start throwing out crazy terms. You're going to look at what he did in his first start, his second start, all the starts, all the data. But from what you've seen from Hagen Smith, right now I want to talk about it because he's off 17
Yeah.
strikeouts. What is his draft profile to you?
So it's funny you mentioned that. So we did our first, I did the first bonus episode of the call up where, we're doing subscription bonus episodes on the weekend. And I had to obviously talk about Hagen Smith's start and how you look at that from a draft perspective, because you don't want to take too much from one start, as you alluded to.
I
But
don't know. Maybe we should.
in
With
this
that one?
instance, in this instance, you probably should, because when you're looking at the draft rankings going into this year, those were predicated on a Hagen Smith who was 92 to 94, maybe grabbing a 5 or 6. And now you're seeing a guy that's, in this start was 96 to 98, grabbing 9s. And from that 3/4 arm slot, and with the stuff that he has kind of working off of that, the slider, as you mentioned, disgusting, and even threw in some good changeups, that's going to be a problem for hitters. Like that looks more like Ricky Tiedemann, whereas before it was like, you could see what could be. We were talking about like Robert Gasser, maybe. But when you get 2, 3 ticks on the fastball from that arm slot, and it's not just on the fastball, then the slider's harder as well. And then you have more separation from the changeup. Like he made guys look uncomfortable. And you mentioned Arkansas left-handed pitcher here, right? This is a battle of two really good teams here, two teams that could be in the College World Series playing Oregon State. Oregon State's leadoff hitter, Travis Bazzana, is arguably the best pure hitter in college baseball. And if you don't want to argue that, he's undoubtedly and inarguably in tier one of the best hitters in college baseball. He made him look silly, dude. Like he punched him 3 times and it was like pretty quick work of him too. And I know it's left on left. It's a disadvantage for Bazzana, but I don't care. He was making lefties and righties look uncomfortable. And look, you have to start to adjust your thoughts on his draft stock off of that start because we've never seen that version of Hagen Smith before. And especially bouncing back off of a really crappy start against James Madison. It was really impressive to see him lock in like that.
College baseball in a nutshell, right? We were talking pre-record about how it's been challenging for me to be betting on college baseball, right? We're lower in the units, right? They're half unit plays, they're for fun, but it's like I'm doing research into these teams, right? And I was asked a lot about this game. And I thought to myself, well, these are both two of my favorite teams in college baseball. You got Hagen Smith on the mound. I don't bet against Hagen Smith, and I wanted to take Arkansas, and they did end up winning. But at the same time, Hagen Smith just got blown up against James Madison. And then he comes out throwing 97 with a slider on a string. Beyond just the stuff, he was throwing the baseball wherever he wanted on every pitch. Didn't make a mistake all night. Mm-hmm. And it's those type of starts where I think to myself, does it really matter who was even in the box?
No.
Right? When it was that good, we're talking about 97 wherever he wants with a slider from hell. Like, that's Rodon. That's where I got that kind of comparison where it was just heat, top of the zone. It was one of the most exciting pitching performances I've seen, even at the major league level. It was incredible.
Well, what's amazing is I think he only had, I was thinking about it. So there's 6 innings. That's 18 outs. So only 1 out was not via the strikeout, which was 1 ground ball. So, like the fielders, the defense must have been bored as hell. Like, you're not doing anything out there, nothing. And usually it's like, oh, you got to work quicker. Like we're getting bored. We're on our heels out here. He was working quickly and just giving them nothing to do. So they were just jogging in and out, basically just doing suicides back and forth from the dugout to their positions. Like, I mean, that's something you just don't see. That's one of the most dominant starts we've seen from a pitcher in college in a long time, really ever. And I think when you look at it from the lens of how loud the stuff is, I mean, we talk about Chase Burns. He's clearly the number 1 pitching prospect off of the stuff and things like that. But if Hagen Smith, and I'm not saying if he strikes out 17 every start, of course, then it's a whole nother story. But even if the stuff is looking like this in terms of fastball now mid to upper 90s, that slider looking the way it did, now sprinkling in some changeups and being around the zone the way that he is, I mean, you can make a really strong case that he's the clear-cut number 2 pitching prospect in this class and kind of overtaking a couple of the other guys. Like if he's looking like this, I'm taking him over Brody Brecht too. As loud as the stuff is, but like, Brecht, he was good, but he walked, that's the Iowa righty who was a NFL prospect. Not really, but he was a power 5 receiver for Iowa. And now just focusing on baseball, like you can tell he's raw. Walked 6 in his first outing, also K'd a bunch of people, but Hagen Smith looks like a very polished pitcher now as well. So I'm eager to see how he follows this up and builds on it, but he's going to be a big part of Arkansas' success this year, and I think we're going to get to see him on a big stage again.
I also want to talk about a hitter that has just been tearing the cover off the ball, but I want to build off that point when you were talking about Chase Burns, because this Wake Forest pitching rotation is unbelievable, right? I'll talk about Chase Burns in a minute, but Josh Hartle, 1.54 ERA. It's not the same strikeout stuff, right? It's low 90s from the left-hand side, 2 walks, though. He's got great command, and he is just a master of limiting runs, right? I think he put it up an ERA below 3 last year for Wake, and is just continuing to do that. And right now, Josh Hartle is the Friday guy. And then we're
Mhm.
not even talking about Michael Massey, who's thrown 7 innings so far at a 1.29 ERA with 13 strikeouts. And Chase Burns actually bet on the under in Wake Forest versus Dayton because I was like, oh, Chase Burns is on the mound. The total's at 15. As long as Wake Forest doesn't put up 15, we're fine, right? But I watched that entire Chase Burns start. The command wasn't there, right? He gave up a home run in the first inning. It didn't look as polished as when I watched Josh Hartle or when I've been watching Hartle over the past year and change, right? So I just wanted to bring it up because I think it's an interesting conversation, right? In college baseball, a guy like Josh Hartle is the Friday guy, which means he's the number one starter in Wake's rotation, or at least that's how they line it up, right? It could be strategic, right? Now we get Chase Burns against the Saturday guy, right? If Hartle can get us through Friday, we're going to win the series kind of no matter what. And that's what they have been doing. But draft prospect wise versus getting college hitters out at a better rate, like from a run prevention stance, like how do you differentiate those two is more the question I wanted to ask because I'm not just going to ask you, how good is Chase Burns? How good is Hartle? How good is Michael Massey? They're all so good. But how do you differentiate that is my big question.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think it's got to be one of those things where I want to see how Hartle consistently performs against some of the best players, their best teams in their conference. Because even Hartle weirdly had a little bit of, for his standards, a little bit of command issues against Dayton as well. Hit a pair of batters, walked a pair of batters, which for his standards is like that's a
Yeah.
wild game. I also gave up a bomb, but Hartle has been just like you mentioned, Mr. Consistency because he's going to fill up the zone and he's going to get a lot of ground balls. So I think for now, I mean, I'm going with Burns because of his ability to just he can single-handedly win you a game. He's going to go out there and he could just blow away everybody. But if we get to ACC play and Hartle's still flying through lineups and really posting more consistent and safer numbers and keeping runners off base and things like that, and Burns has kind of these ups and downs a little bit, I think you could go with a Hartle, but for now, I look at somebody like Burns and I'm like, if you're facing the best lineup in the country or a top 10 team, I think they're going to get to Hartle eventually, where Burns could just cruise through like and single handedly just send you to the College World Series. Really like what Kumar Rocker did to Duke to put them away and go to the College World Series. It was him versus Bryce Jarvis. Jarvis shoved, Rocker shoved even more through a no hitter, and the rest was history. So I think Burns has that capability. But Hartle, I think, is going to be the safe guy through the regular season. I'm still going with the guy that can legitimately twirl a no hitter for you if he's dialed in.
I know this is something that you would probably mention as well is that once you get to the big leagues, the margin of error is so much smaller, right? Like Chase Burns, when he's throwing 101, like you could throw 101 down the middle and still get swings and misses. If you're Josh Hartle throwing 91 down the middle, like most major leaguers are going to tee that up, right? So it's you get to these higher levels and this stuff from Chase Burns is just so overwhelming where it's like Hartle has much, I think, a higher pitchability right now than Chase Burns does. But if we wait for Chase Burns to kind of grow into that a little bit, then it's basically over. I think that's kind of what you're saying.
Well, and I think just the better the lineups are, like, you're going to face some really good ACC lineups that I think can get to Hartle again. Like they'll put up a couple runs on him. Like we looked at even looking at the game logs last year, like there's a lot of outings where he's given up 3, 4, 5 runs. And I think he's going to give you a shot every single outing. He's going to give you 5, 6 innings, sometimes 7, and be really consistent and fill up the zone. But again, like Burns can, no matter who is in the box. You talked about it not really mattering who is in the box. When we just saw when Hagen Smith went, like Hartle, there's going to be situations where I think it matters who's in the box. With Chase Burns, if Chase Burns is on, it doesn't matter who in college baseball is in the box. His biggest competition is Chase Burns. I think Hartle, it's a little bit different than that. So I think it's going to depend on conference play, how these guys look, but I'm still going with Burns in a winner take all because he could really win it for you himself.
Yeah, but what if Hartle pulls a Hagen Smith and just starts throwing 97 with a slider?
Yeah, then it's game over. Then it's game over.
Let's transition to the offensive side. This guy's going to go in the top 10 picks, and he's starting to have a conversation for the number one overall pick. His name is Charlie Condon out of Georgia. He's played 7 games so far, Aram. He's hitting
Yep.
643. 3 bombs, 5 doubles, 6 walks, 3 strikeouts. So before this episode started, I wrote down his stats, right? He was hitting 609. He had 3 homers, 3 doubles, 5 walks. I'm sure you can piece 2 and 2 together for everybody listening. That means in this Sunday game, I think it was against Kennesaw State, he went 4 for 5 with 2 doubles. But I think the thing that separates him of potentially going number one, because we know the bat is just overwhelming. He's 6'6", 220 pounds, a mammoth of a man. But the fact, did I see him in the outfield?
Yep.
At first base? Like, he's an athlete. When you're comparing, and I know it's tough, right? You're comparing a guy like Nick Kurtz to Charlie Condon. Nick Kurtz looks like he has such a better kind of setup at the plate. He hasn't got off to the hottest start like Charlie Condon has, but he's still obviously. I feel like whenever I'm watching a weight game, he's 1 for 1 with 3 walks. Like in every game, it's so many walks for Kurtz because nobody wants to face him. So if he was getting right fastballs that Condon's getting right now, he'd obliterate them. But Condon, I mean, he is the scariest hitter in college baseball to me right now.
I mean, I would agree with that. The guy's hitting the living crap out of the ball too. Like it's not just about the fact that he's making contact the way that he is. And it's funny, when I was putting together our mock draft and when I was watching more of Condon, this was before the season started, I legitimately sent a text to Pete Flaherty and said, is there any reasonable situation where Charlie Condon can go 1-1 because this swing is different? And he's like, he's going to have to really hit. And I'm like, I think he might really hit. I didn't think he'd do this out of the gate. And I mean, we're talking about a guy that I'm pretty sure already has like 6 batted balls over 110. Like, I know it's with metal, but really the rule of thumb with metal, you could subtract like 3 to 5 miles per hour. Even if you want to be aggressive and subtract 5 miles per hour, like, all right, he hit a double 117 the other day. Like, this guy's hitting the living crap out of the ball. He had a home run, also 110. Like, he's hitting balls really hard. But what's amazing is he's also making plenty of contact. Like, for a 6'6" guy that's this long to have this efficient and smooth of a swing, and to the one thing he was aggressive last year, cutting down on the chase, being more, I think more well-rounded of a hitter. This is a guy that was a redshirt freshman last year, which is crazy. Like, I don't even know why he redshirted. He must have really made some strides in that redshirt time, but he was a redshirt freshman last year. So it's not like he has a ton of reps either. He's gonna be a draft eligible sophomore, redshirt sophomore. And I mean, he is just exploding. I think this is a guy that could easily be one of the first bats off the board. I think people might side with the track record of Kurtz hitting from the left side, but I think Condon can make this a conversation if he keeps doing what he's doing.
I think also for Condon, right? Because Kurtz is playing first base, right? If Charlie Condon can play a serviceable corner, do you think that'll matter, right? Or do you think teams will just be like, just give us the better bat? And they
Yeah.
might just say, we still want Nick Kurtz, which is totally fine. I think Nick Kurtz is a manimal, right? Nick Kurtz is easily, I think he's still probably the best hitter in college baseball. I know there's JJ Weatherholt. I know there's Travis Bazzana. Me personally, I have Nick Kurtz as the number 1 hitter in college baseball. When I'm talking about scary, right, and we're talking about potentially defensive versatility, maybe that's when he gets the leg up, right? We're talking about JJ Weatherholt. If he can play short, that's maybe what levels up his draft stock a little bit. Travis Bazzana, kind of the same thing. I'm curious if that matters a ton.
I think the bats would have to be like almost a push, which is unlikely. I think one of them is going to separate themselves a little bit. So I think ultimately it's just going to be whose bat stands out a little bit more, and who fits the draft models, and who scouts, are really raving about more for let's assume it's the Guardians, who the Guardians are taking. But it does help. I think the fact that Condon is a little bit more athletic than people thought in the outfield, and now even seeing some action at third, like, I don't know about that, but I think he could definitely get by in a corner. So that helps if the offensive profile is super comparable, and I don't think it's crazy that might happen. I think Kurtz right now is dealing with not getting pitched to. He walked 4 times his last game against Dayton. Like,
if you watch weight games, he does not get a single pitch in the strike zone for basically the entire time.
it's insane. So I think he's really worried, and I think Condon's going to start to get that treatment too for Georgia.
Oh yeah,
But it's surprising because Wake Forest is so loaded. I wonder if they start playing with the idea of Kurtz hitting like leadoff. The way we saw kind of the Schwarber situation sometimes with the Phillies, like having Kurtz hit a little bit earlier in the lineup, force them to pitch to him. because it just seems like it's frustrating for him at this point, just not seeing anything in the zone. But that's a guy that when he connects to that swing from the left side is up there with anybody.
It's also got to be frustrating for college pitchers when you walk Nick Kurtz and you're like, all right, we got past Nick Kurtz. You know, he didn't cause a lot of damage, right? We're not looking at any extra base hits. And then you go over to Seaver King, who's probably going to be what, a first rounder, and then he's hitting bombs too. It's a very good team Wake Forest has. They are the number one team for a reason.
Yeah.
But talking about really, really good teams, right? It's easy to say that Wake is really good and Arkansas is really good and all the teams at the top. But I wanted to highlight three and that are really doing a great job in my eyes. So the real deal of college baseball, Duke is 7-0. They beat 23 ranked Indiana. They pissed on George Mason 23-5. They beat 18th ranked Coastal Carolina. They beat a 4-2 Liberty team, and then they swept Northwestern. This team, Aram, and I know you got a lot of friends who have played at Duke a ton, so this is probably a team that's on your TV more often than not.
Yeah.
You got Santucci on the mound, and then an offense that I think we even talked to Pete Flaherty. I think people were just unsure what the offense would look like, right? With a lot of guys graduating, a lot of guys leaving. It's just, we liked the offense, but we didn't realize it would just piss all over teams. And then the pitching is the strong suit, and it still is a great pitching staff. This team could win it all.
Yeah, Duke's good, man. I obviously kept up with them more with my buddies, as you mentioned. They were a game from the College World Series twice. Got beaten by Josh Young and Texas Tech, and that team had a bunch of dudes on it too. And then they got no hit by Kumar Rocker in the rubber match against Vanderbilt. So I mean, Duke's been right there several times. They've been really loaded with talent. Even I mean, what Chris Pollard has done there, really since that first recruiting class that he kind of took over with, which included like Matt Mervis and Griffin Conine and Jimmy Herron, who's in the Rocky system. Like they've built something pretty good here with Duke. And this is even with some of the guys that they've lost to the draft. Like they had Jordan Walker, signed to them as well. They had Evan Carter signed to Duke as well. Like they've had some dudes that they've lost out on the draft, both of which, people really thought Evan Carter was going to make it to campus. And then Jordan Walker was considered as actually kind of a 60-40 leaning towards going to campus. So like, imagine if they had some of those guys over the last few years too. Duke is becoming a really legitimate program. And now you're seeing it again because of the development too. Like Santucci came in as a two-way player. Now he's really focusing on pitching. Now he looks like a slam dunk first round pick. Another guy that could be right in that conversation with Hartle as, one of the better left-handers in the country. I think Hagen Smith now kind of elevating himself as the top lefty, but Duke's got a ball club, man, and I'm excited to see what they do this year, but they've turned into a power.
So that's a great team in the ACC. Moving over to the Big 12. I mean, the Texas Longhorns look really, really good. They're coming off 3 shutout wins against Cal Poly, which is a pretty good team, and a series win against a really good San Diego team who's kind of pissing all over Arizona, another team I liked. So those wins over San Diego makes Texas look even better. But it was the pitching from this past weekend that I was watching. LeBaron Johnson, 8-inning shutout. Charlie Hurley, 6-inning shutout. Cody Howard, 5-inning shutout. The pitching has just been overwhelming for the Texas Longhorns. Like, we know they're always a team that can hit, but if they have pitching like this is a team that can definitely compete. Moving over to the SEC, Southeastern Conference, Alabama is 8-0. The competition has been kind of garbage, right? We mentioned a couple teams off the top, like Manhattan, Middle Tennessee, right? Valparaiso, that's another college that they just beat the living piss out of. But I'm not going to ding them for playing bad competition because they have 5 mercy rules in 8 games. So in college baseball, if you are ahead by 10 runs or more in the 7th inning, it's called, right? It's not like Major League Baseball, but in college baseball, let's say they're winning 11-1 in the 7th, game over, right? 13-3. 14-4, anything like that or higher, the game is called. They've only played 3 9-inning games so far because they have been pillaging teams. The offense just gets on you so quick and it's 9-0 before you even blink, right? The pitching just continually shutting them down. And when I watch Alabama play, while they are beating the living crap out of bad competition, there's a ton of talent on this team. So those are 3 teams that I've been watching this weekend beyond the obvious. Obviously, these teams are already good, but I just want to put them in the forefront to start including them in the Wake Forest, in the Oregon State, in the Arkansas, the LSU, the TCU type ranges. These teams are overwhelming.
Ben Hess, Alabama right-hander, another, just kind of names to watch to tune in because I enjoy watching college baseball for the draft prospects predominantly. That's really what I'm going to tune in the most. And Ben Hess looks like a slam dunk first round pick as well. Definitely a guy worth tuning into for some of those big SEC matchups, and he's going to be a big part of what they do this year too.
We praised a lot of teams. Now it's time to figure out who's the fraud of college baseball right now, and that is the Stanford University. 1-5. They lost 2 of 3 to Cal State Fullerton, who is a fine team. It's fine, right? But then you lose a midweek game to UNLV. Then you lose 2 straight to Penn State. Penn State at the time was listed as dogs of plus 300 or higher. And Penn State didn't just beat them, beat the shit out of them, right? Stanford, man, they lose Braden Montgomery to Texas A&M, who was their best player, right?
That's top 15 pick. I think a guy that could play his way into the top 10.
But Stanford is a great baseball program to be off to a start like this. And this is also a Stanford team that, when they are good, they've been kind of fraudulent when it comes to the College World Series, right? Getting to Omaha, or at least performing in Omaha when they get there. But this feels like rock bottom for a team that has been a prohibitive favorite now for the last 10 years, 20 years. This is the worst I've ever seen Stanford.
Yeah, they have a 6 ERA starting pitching wise. They have a 10 ERA in the bullpen. Their slashing as a team 253, 350, 394. Yeah, that's not great. No. And I know it sucks to lose a top 15, potentially top 10 pick. And Montgomery is one of my favorite bats in this class. But yeah, this is as weak as we've seen Stanford in a little bit of time. Also lost Tommy Troy, but first round pick, Diamondback system, really good player. But we usually see teams like this, schools like this reload, and it doesn't look like they really reloaded much this year.
Yeah, like for example, TCU lost Braden Taylor last year, or from last year, and he was a top pick in the draft, right? They lost guys and they completely reloaded, and now they're number 5 in the country, right? LSU just lost Paul Skeens and Dylan Cruz. You think they're having a tough time right now? Absolutely not. Now, I'm not saying Stanford should be in that same exact conversation, but over the last 10 years, they have been in that conversation. So to come out this slow against not the greatest competition in the world has just been extremely underwhelming for a team that I always just tend to root for and want to watch. And it's just been fraudulent. It's been absolutely fraudulent for the Stanford Cardinal. College baseball wrap up. Let's move on to some spring training notes. Again, guys, we have some notes. We're going to overreact, or at least I'm going to overreact because that's who I am. But we also have to remember it's very early. Guys are just getting reps in. But Aram and I have a couple of points that we just saw and we wanted to share, right? Whether it's good, whether it's bad. I'm mostly focused on pitching because that's normally how I watch spring training. I'm looking, is your velo up there? How's your command early on? Because hitting, it just takes reps. We know who some of the good hitters are. It's not often. I remember Kyle Higashioka hit 1 billion home runs in spring training, and it hasn't amounted to much. So with hitters, I generally don't have takeaways other than the fact that Spencer Jones and Aaron Judge are both hitting 1,000, which is just awesome for me. Juan Soto is hitting 500 and he hit a oppo bomb. That's fun. It does not matter to me, right? But some pitching things for me, headlined by Cole Irvin. Cole Irvin.
Our friend Brendan Mortensen warned us. Of course, doing great stuff covering the Orioles, and he's just sending us a text like, "Oh, he's getting more horizontal run." He didn't mention he's also throwing harder with more horizontal run. So, the one trade that we were kind of saying, "Ooh, this might not be good," because Daryl Ornai is probably going to be the starting shortstop, or as a case to be in Oakland. All of a sudden, Cole Irvin might be good if they need him too. With Kyle Bradish going down, it's just, and John Means kind of, I don't know what the deal is with him. I think he's still dealing with some stuff and being a little bit behind where he wants to be. This would be huge for the Orioles if Cole Irvin can even just be a serviceable 4/5. If he's a serviceable back end of the rotation starter, they're in a good spot.
What if he wins the Cy Young because he's throwing 96 now? No, but seriously, the metrics on what he showed in his first spring training outing were absurd. I know it's a crazy small sample. It's the first day of spring training. Who cares? But I was just in awe. The cutter is up 3.5 miles an hour.
Yeah.
His average was 85. He was averaging 89 with the cutter. His four seam, he averages 92. He hit 96. averaging 94. The curveball is even going up 2 miles an hour. The sinker, he was hitting 95 with sinkers.
Yeah.
Changeup was even harder. And there was a couple of quotes here that I wanted to read from Jake Rill, who is the Orioles beat writer for MLB.com, who was speaking to Cole Irvin after the game. And Cole Irvin kind of had a quote that fired me up. I'm starting to buy in narratives. Maybe when we've got a full Camden Yards, maybe we see a couple higher numbers. End quote from Cole Irvin. I mean,
That's
what if
funny
he's
as hell.
98 in a full Baltimore? With full Baltimore fans at Camden Yards. And then from James McCann, the catcher, and I quote, it kind of caught us off guard. The velo, the way the ball was coming out of his hand. He also noted that Pirates hitters did not have comfortable takes versus Irwin today. I mean, should we bet on him to win Cy Young? Or what should we do?
I mean, it's exciting. It's a big
It's
development for them.
cool.
And it's not like he threw like one inning. It was two, because
Who?
we saw like a one inning spurt last year where I think he averaged 94 in that one inning, but he never touched 6 or 7. So to see him, breaking 6 and might even have more in the tank as he continues to build up, like that's exciting. I love that. I love that he's already feeling himself velo
I
wise, saying
love
like, oh,
it.
if we pack the house, like maybe I'll show you triple digits. Like we'll have to find out. You might have to pack the house. So I'm pumped. It's fun. I'm all the way on the Orioles bandwagon, but I love the unsung heroes and some of the like underrated contributors, potentially helping this team over the top because they're gonna need that. And I mean, this is definitely something that you have to like. We're not adjusting our perspective just yet, but
I don't know.
you're
I think
keyed
I am.
in. You're keyed in to
Yeah.
be prepared to
Yes.
adjust your expectations, I think.
That's exactly the perfect way to put it. We're keying in and we're watching. And what I just watched
It's got
was
the
Cole
attention.
Irvin throwing 96. And I went to go look up Arm because I was like, Cole Irvin's probably what, 33, 34? He's 30. I
Yeah.
thought he was much older than he is. He's 30, right? Maybe this is a renaissance. I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm
Maybe
fired
this is
up.
an emerging ace.
This might be an emerging ace. Shout out Danny Duffy. Shout out the
He
projected
threw
play
actually the other day.
listeners.
I was going to text you. I saw
How'd he
Danny
do?
Duffy. I
Was
forgot.
he emerging?
He's emerging. He's
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 emerging.
emerging back up. He's back.
That's one of the
Rangers.
funny. That's one of the funniest bits for any of our new listeners. I was such a total moron. I think in 2021, like we first started the podcast and we were talking about pitchers that we really like. And Danny Duffy is from my hometown, and I was trying to hype him up a little bit. I called him an emerging ace. And then I think either you or Jack
Jack
had a
was like,
whole.
he's like
He's like
33.
31, dude. And I'm like, is he? And then we know what happened to Danny Duffy. Do you have a takeaway? I have a couple of more.
Just a couple rapid fire, like
Yeah.
just things that like I'm looking at from like younger players, younger arms. Again, we talk about velo being a big key. Landon Knack, like Dodgers pitching prospect to people have kind of been wondering, okay, where does he fit in? Is he going to get an opportunity? And he's put up some really good numbers in the past, but injuries and stuff have kind of caused his velocity to fluctuate. And he's a guy that's very dependent on that. We've seen him sit 93, 94, even averaging 95 with the fastball sometimes. But then we've seen him as low as 90 to 91, which is where he was at the end of the season last year. I know it was only 2 innings of work, but his final outing at the end of last year, he went 2 innings and averaged 90 with the fastball. 2 innings in the first spring training appearance, strikes out 4, nobody reaches base. He was sitting 94 and touching 6. So that was really impressive. Seeing the changeup, I mean, that's his best pitch. So having the fastball with more life, it allows the changeup to play up more. And, Landon Knack looks pretty damn good. And with Pepe out, being sent over to the Rays in that Glasnow trade, there's a little bit more importance on Knack, especially, as they try to fill in innings in the early part of the season. I think Landon Knack's a guy that, I'm excited to see what he continues to do if he can hold that velocity, because that's been the trouble for him. But he looked damn good in his first appearance.
No doubt about it. If we're still talking about velo, I was really impressed with Nathan Eovaldi, right? Because he's a guy who, has dealt with TJ
You're always
multiple
looking at the velo with
times.
him. Yeah.
Always looking at velo with Nathan Eovaldi because it's so important to him. Obviously, he can pitch, but when he's 96, 97 at the top of the zone, he goes from a number 3 starter to potentially an ace, like we saw in the postseason. Averaging 96 in his first spring training game, right? Last year, he averaged 95.2, 95.7 the year before. So it was good to see him at least maintain that type of velocity in the early goings. And, my favorite pitcher maybe of all time at this point, Cole Reagan's 2 innings, 5 Ks. Lance Brzdowski put out a tweet. The last strikeout to Zach Neto 101 with 20 inches of IVB, induced vertical break.
Yeah.
What the
That's, I
fuck?
mean, that's an off the charts fastball.
That's off the charts.
That's
That's
outlier.
Strider at his peak.
Yeah,
That's from the left
that's
side, and Cole Reagan says 4 other pitches.
dude. Like we might have to if he can sustain that because he's a double TJ guy too,
Yep.
which is interesting. So like that part is a little. I'm just like always worried about what the velo may look like if there's fluctuations, but there hasn't been yet. I mean, that's a guy that I might sprinkle on a Cy Young just because that's alien stuff. Like that's freakish stuff. People forget this was a first round arm. Like he is very talented. He's just dealt with a lot. Clearly something's clicked. I hope he can stay healthy because I mean, you can't teach that shit.
Can't teach that shit. So that's the end of the spring training notes, unless you have anything more before we talk to Walker.
No, the last thing I mentioned real quick is just Yuki Matsui. San Diego Padres signing, like he looked nasty. And you look at swing reactions from hitters, like that's another thing that you can kind of pick up in spring training. Hitters looked super uncomfortable against Matsui. That's something that stood out to me because I think he could pick up saves for them this year. I think he's going to be a really good high leverage arm for them. So talked about that. Kind of broke it down more in the bonus call up episode, but Yuki Matsui, he might be a dude in the back end of the bullpen for the Padres.